Here's something most people never say out loud. They're not broke. They're not rich. They're just moving. Month after month, paycheck to paycheck, not drowning, not swimming, just treading water, staying afloat. And the strange thing is, this is happening to people with decent jobs, people with degrees, people who work 40, sometimes 50 hours a week, people who, by most visible measures, appear to be doing fine. But if you ask them, quietly, privately, how close they are to a real financial crisis, if something went wrong, most of them would pause a little longer than they should before answering. That pause is what this video is about. There is a financial pattern spreading quietly across the United States and Europe. It doesn't look like poverty. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like a normal life. It looks like your neighbor's life. It looks like your own life, possibly. And the number attached to this pattern is not small. $3 trillion. That's the estimated total of consumer debt, credit cards, auto loans, buy now, pay later arrangements currently sitting on the balance sheets of ordinary working people across the developed world. Not corporate debt, not government debt, personal debt, carried by individuals who, in most cases, have a job, pay their bills on time, and genuinely believe they are managing their finances responsibly. This is what economists sometimes call a cockroach problem. Not because the people are the problem, but because when you see one sign of it, there are almost certainly many more you haven't noticed yet. So let's look a little more carefully. Let me walk you through a person. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel is 31 years old. He lives in a mid-sized city. Could be Chicago, could be Manchester, could be Frankfurt. He works in marketing, earns about $58,000 a year before taxes. After federal and state taxes, Social Security, and his health insurance contribution, he takes home approximately $3,800 a month. That's a real salary. That's not nothing. His rent is $1,450 a month, a one-bedroom apartment that he chose because it was close to work, and because, after years of roommates, he wanted his own space. That felt reasonable. That felt like a natural step forward. His car payment is $430 a month. He drives a 2022 sedan, nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, but he financed it over 72 months, which felt manageable at the time. The dealer told him the monthly payment was affordable, and he agreed because it was. He has $11,000 in student loan debt still remaining from his undergraduate degree. The minimum monthly payment is $180. He pays that minimum every month reliably. His phone plan is $85 a month. He has a streaming subscription bundle that comes to about $55 a month. A couple of platforms, music, nothing unusual. He goes to the gym for $40 a month. He eats lunch near the office most days, maybe $12 to $15 a meal. He has one credit card. The balance sits at around $4,200. He pays more than the minimum each month, usually about $200, because he is, by his own understanding, responsible with money. The interest rate on that card is 24.9% annually. Now let's add this up together. Rent, $1,450. Car, $430. Student loan, $180. Phone, $85. Subscriptions, $55. Gym, $40. Card payment, $200. That's $2,440 before he has bought a single meal at home, paid a utility bill, put gas in his car, or bought anything at all. He has $1,360 left for everything else. Groceries maybe $350, utilities $120, gas $80, and then life. A friend's birthday dinner, a flight home for the holidays, a dentist appointment, a shirt that wore out, an unexpected car expense, a medical copay. Daniel does not feel like he is in financial trouble. He pays his bills. He has not missed a payment. He has about $900 in his savings account. But Daniel has not saved anything meaningful in over 2 years. And if something went wrong, a job loss, a medical event, a car breakdown, he would be in serious difficulty within 60 days. Daniel is not an outlier. Daniel is, statistically, a median outcome for a college-educated professional in his early 30s in a major metropolitan area. And Daniel, like most people in his situation, is not fully aware of the structure of what's happening to him. The problem isn't that Daniel spends too much on luxuries. That's not the story here. He doesn't have a boat. He doesn't take exotic vacations. He doesn't wear expensive watches or eat at fine restaurants every week. The problem is something more structural and in many ways more insidious. It's the architecture of his expenses. Every single month, before Daniel makes a single conscious decision about money, $2,440 leaves his account automatically. Before he chooses anything, before he considers anything, the machine is already running and he is simply maintaining it. This is what financial researchers sometimes describe as fixed cost creep, the slow, gradual accumulation of recurring monthly obligations that individually each seemed reasonable, even smart, but collectively have become a ceiling on Daniel's financial life. The apartment upgrade was a reasonable decision. The car loan was a manageable number. The credit card was for emergencies. The subscriptions were convenient. None of them, in isolation, looked like a problem, but together they have constructed a financial cage that Daniel walks into every month without fully recognizing it as a cage. And here is the part that most people miss. It's not the spending that's the primary issue. It's the compounding cost of debt that no one adds up clearly. That credit card, $4,200 at 24.9% annual interest, costs Daniel roughly $87 a month in interest alone. He is paying $200 a month, which means only $113 is actually reducing his balance. At that rate, it will take him over 3 years to pay off that card, and he will pay approximately $1,100 in interest charges for the privilege of borrowing money he used years ago. His car, financed over 72 months, will cost him, in total financing charges, somewhere around $4,800 over the life of the loan. That's on top of the vehicle's price. That's nearly $5,000 paid to a lender for the convenience of not having to wait. His student loan minimum payment barely touches the principal. He is not building toward anything. He is, financially speaking, running on a treadmill, a well-dressed treadmill, but a treadmill nonetheless. And the reason this pattern is so widespread, the reason it deserves the word spreading, is that it is not caused by stupidity or irresponsibility. It is caused by a financial system that has been engineered at almost every level to make this outcome feel not just acceptable, but normal. Let's do something simple here. Let's take the numbers out of Daniel's life and put them on a table where we can actually see them. Over the course of 1 year, Daniel pays approximately $1,044 in credit card interest. He pays approximately $800 in auto loan financing charges. His student loan interest adds roughly $500 to what he actually owes in real terms. That's close to $2,350 per year that Daniel is paying, not toward anything he owns or will own, but simply for the cost of having borrowed money. Now hold that number. If Daniel did not have that debt architecture, if, instead of those monthly obligations, he redirected just $200 a month into a basic index fund, a broad market fund, nothing exotic, and left it there for 30 years at a historical average return of approximately 7% annually, that $200 a month would grow to somewhere in the range of $240,000. That's not a prediction. That's compound interest doing what compound interest does when it is allowed to work for you instead of against you. $200 a month, the amount he's currently sending to a credit card company, mostly as interest payments. Now, let's look at the car. Daniel is spending $430 a month on a vehicle. In the United States, the average new car payment has now exceeded $700 a month. In the UK, personal contract purchase arrangements, PCPs, have made it normal for people to perpetually rent cars they believe they own. If Daniel, instead of financing a newer car, had bought a $12,000 used vehicle in cash, which is entirely possible on his salary with a short period of intentional saving, he would have $430 a month freed up. That's $5,160 a year. Over 10 years invested modestly. That's a very different financial life. None of this is about deprivation. This is about the mathematical difference between building and servicing. Daniel is servicing. He is paying for a past he cannot change. He is not building toward a future he actually wants. And the uncomfortable question is, how many people right now are in essentially the same structure? The answer, based on the data, is tens of millions. Now, understanding this intellectually doesn't explain why it happens, because these are not, as I said, unintelligent people. Daniel is smart. He reads. He follows the news. He knows, in theory, that debt is costly. So why does this pattern persist? Part of it is social comparison. And this is older than social media, though social media has accelerated it considerably. When Daniel moved into his one-bedroom apartment, part of the calculation, perhaps an unspoken part, was that it reflected where he was in his life. His colleagues had nice places. His friends from university were posting photos of their apartments, their furniture, their weekend trips. There is a kind of unspoken expectation that by your early 30s, you should be living in a certain way. The car is similar. He needed a car. But between the $7,000 used option and the $28,000 financed option, one of them felt like him. One of them felt like the person he was becoming. This is not vanity in the simple sense. This is something closer to identity maintenance, the way people use money to tell a story about who they are, primarily to themselves. And that story has a cost that rarely appears on any budget spreadsheet. There is also something psychologists call present bias, the deeply human tendency to feel the future as abstract and the present as vivid and real. A $430 monthly payment feels manageable today. The idea of $4,800 in unnecessary financing charges over 6 years feels theoretical, so the brain processes them differently. The monthly number wins. And then there is the comfort dimension. After years of study, after working hard, after doing what was supposed to be done, there is a genuine, legitimate desire for some comfort, for an apartment that feels like a home, for a car that starts reliably, for small pleasures, the streaming service, the gym, that make daily life feel livable. That desire is completely understandable. The financial system has learned to meet that desire at precisely the point where it is strongest, and to offer credit as the bridge between what people can currently afford and what they feel they deserve. That bridge is not free, but by the time the cost becomes visible, the bridge has already been crossed. Let's not dramatize this. Let's just follow the trajectory honestly. If Daniel continues on this path, maintaining his debt, not increasing his savings, adding new obligations as his lifestyle gradually upgrades, the picture at 45 is not catastrophic. He will probably still be employed. He will probably still be paying his bills on time, but his financial anxiety will likely be higher, not lower, because the obligations will have grown alongside or faster than his income. A mortgage may have been added, perhaps a child, perhaps a second car. The fixed costs will have expanded. The cushion will still be thin. His retirement savings, if he has not actively prioritized them, will be well below where they need to be. The math on catching up in your mid-40s is significantly less forgiving than the math on starting steadily in your late 20s and early 30s. He will have achieved the appearance of stability while quietly carrying its structural fragility. And this is the quiet epidemic that the $3 trillion number is pointing to. It is not a crisis in the dramatic sense, not yet.
It is a slow narrowing of options, a lifestyle that costs more each year to maintain, a growing distance between income and actual financial security, a freedom that keeps getting pushed further into the future of how people actually experience their daily lives. And the most troubling part is not the hardship itself, but the invisibility of it. Because from the outside, Daniel looks fine.
Which means the pattern rarely triggers the alarm responses that might cause someone to stop and reconsider. There is a different way to think about this. Not a better personality, just a different framework for processing the same decisions. People who tend to build real financial resilience over time, not through extraordinary income, but through ordinary income used differently, share a few thinking patterns worth understanding. The first is that they tend to be significantly less interested in what their financial life looks like to others, and significantly more interested in what it actually produces. They distinguish between the signal and the substance. The car communicates success. Owning the car outright with no monthly payment produces optionality. These are different things. They choose the substance. The second is that they treat their fixed monthly costs not as a product of their lifestyle choices.
Choices, but as a structural variable they actively manage. They ask periodically, what does this month cost me before I make any decisions? And they are uncomfortable when that number is high. Not because they are frugal in some punishing sense, but because they understand that high fixed costs reduce the number of available moves. In chess, this is called being positionally poor. You're not in check, you haven't lost, but your pieces have very few good squares to go to. You've been restricted. This is what high fixed cost living does financially. The third pattern is time horizon. People who tend to build quietly over time are able to hold two timelines simultaneously, the one they are living in now and the one they are moving toward. This doesn't mean they don't enjoy the present. It means they don't sacrifice the future for the present without understanding the trade they're making. Daniel does not necessarily need to make dramatic changes. He doesn't need to move to a cheaper apartment immediately or sell his car tomorrow. Those may or may not be the right decisions. What he needs first is a clear-eyed account of what his current structure actually costs, not in monthly payments, but in years, in optionality, in the version of his life at 50 that is or isn't possible depending on decisions made now. That clarity, once you have it, tends to change behavior naturally, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The $3 trillion in consumer debt sitting across the developed world right now is not evidence of widespread recklessness. It is evidence of a system that has made borrowing easier than saving, that has made present consumption more visceral than future security, and that has made
a certain financial structure feel not just normal, but inevitable. It spreads not like a virus, not dramatically, not visibly, but like a cockroach infestation, quietly, in the walls, in places people don't normally look. And by the time it becomes visible, it's usually more established than anyone realized. The goal of this video was not to make anyone feel bad about the choices they've made. The goal was to make the structure visible. Because financial clarity doesn't come from shame. It comes from looking honestly at the numbers, understanding why certain decisions felt right when you made them, and then asking, with genuine curiosity rather than guilt, whether those decisions are still serving you the way you intended. Daniel's situation is fixable. It is not a catastrophe. It is a structure that can be gradually, thoughtfully, and patiently rebuilt. And so is yours, if any of this felt familiar. Awareness is not a small thing. Seeing something clearly is the necessary condition for changing it. If this video gave you something to think about, a slightly different way to look at your own financial structure, consider subscribing to the channel.
We make more videos like this one. Calm, honest, and without the hype.